Hannah.
Emma.
Hi, there we go. That's how it's supposed to work, which is you're on the screen when I press a button. We'll let everybody join because I know that the team behind me are just in the midst of letting people in. But first of all, it's good to see you here quite literally to make sure that the technology works. So that's a very, very good start. And we'll give everybody a minute or two to log on, make sure their sound works, make sure they've got their headsets on and can limber up. But maybe what I'll do as people are starting to join is I will quickly just share the kind of point of today, what we thought might be a really good topic for discussion and why we've asked you to come. And then when we've given it a minute or two, we'll do a proper introduction. Almost everything that we've ever achieved, us as a business, me as a person, the world, in fact, has been done by groups working together. We're naturally social, interconnected. Our brains are designed to function best collectively. And of course, enterprise alumni, we do that for corporates, right? But I remember walking down the street in Cambridge University at what must be 8-9 months ago and seeing your book in the window, seeing the visual and seeing the title Joined Up Thinking and reading the sort of back of it. And I bought it immediately because I knew that it would really feed into my love of communal power. I guess technology helps us to share our wisdom and knowledge in a much more diverse way than ever before. It's not just in a book, it's not just when we're sitting in the library, but webinars, many ways that we can sort of really ingest information. So we're going to sit down with you today, which I'm literally doing, I can see you are too, and we're going to introduce everybody to the neuroscientist and best-selling author, Dr. Hannah Critchlow. Do I have to call you doctor or can I just call you Hannah?
Hannah or Han, up to you.
Okay.
My sister's called Emma, so I might slip into M by accident because I'm going to be going to see my sister for Christmas. So.
That's okay. You and my dad. So what we managed to do in the first 30 seconds is really just kill any sense of not knowing each other for a very long time. But obviously we've communicated for a really long time. And I think maybe let's introduce you and then crack on the ways that collective intelligence might be applied through alumni networks and of course in our wider business world. So thank you everyone for joining, and I know we're gonna have lots of people listening to this afterwards. On the line today we've got Dr. Hannah Critchlow, who is an internationally acclaimed neuroscientist, broadcaster, author, and I know that you're a fellow at Magdalen College in university because I messaged you whilst I was standing in Cambridge and you replied, and then I did a Google. So I literally discovered you right outside your doorstep. In 2022, she received an honorary doctorate from Brunel University for her work in neuroscience and communication. And I have a long list of your accolades here, Hannah, but the one that I think I'll read out is you're recognised as a top 100 UK scientist by the Science Council and one of Cambridge University's most inspirational and successful women in science. So thank you very much for joining us today. I think it's going to become very evident to everybody whilst you're joining us, and to those that have your book, then again, they also have a head start. So I think maybe, Hannah, why don't we kick off with perhaps you can tell us about the book that prompted the conversation that we're about to have. Can you tell us a bit about what it is and why you wrote it? And then we can dig in on all the questions that we thought of.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was doing my original PhD, so I did my PhD looking at dendritic spine plasticity in the role of schizophrenia. About 20 years ago, actually, around this time, 20 years ago, I started at Cambridge University as a graduate student. And my PhD was very much looking at how our individual life stories might be created. So how connections within the brain actually change as a result of our experiences, but are also set down when we're a baby in the womb, and our foundations of thought are basically laid as our circuitry is being developed and being born as we're a baby, due to the genes that we've been given from our mum and dad. So my PhD was looking very much at how our unique set of life experiences and our unique set of genes that we've been given from our mum and dad create this very individual cartography of the mind. So we have all of these nerve cells within our brain. Each one is connected to around 10,000 other nerve cells to create this really intricate and sophisticated circuit board with around 86 trillion connections. And it's this circuit board that uses electrical signals that whoosh around the brain at speeds of around 120 miles an hour to basically create our sense of reality, our perception of the world, and to then instruct and dictate how we're going to interact with the world, the decisions that we're going to make, and how we're going to communicate with other people, and how we're going to move about the world, how we're going to navigate through life to eventually create a very unique life story. So my PhD was basically at that. spending thousands of hours staring down a microscope at brain slices, looking at individual brains.
By the way, this is already above my pay grade, so I really hope that I can keep going for the full hour, Hannah.
So I'll make it. But then, so I wrote a book called The Science of Fate, which is basically, it was a Sunday Times bestseller. It's been translated into, I think it's about 8 different languages and counting. And it's done very well. And it talks about how our destiny, if you like, is predisposed due to our brain biology and how it affects all of our decision makings. And all of that is absolutely fascinating. But really that book kind of ends up talking about how our environment, how our culture also plays a role in shaping how we view the world. And that's what I really wanted to focus on for the next book. And there's huge amounts of neuroscience knowledge that's coming out, in the last 10 years or so. There's been a shift from neuroscience researchers looking at how our individual brains work, how we can start to unleash the full potential of our own individual brain power, to actually looking at how we can start working together and what's the neurobiology of joined up thinking, allowing us to communicate and build consensus and learn from each other so that new ideas can take shape and hop and merge and evolve from mind to mind. The pandemic. So I wrote the book actually during the pandemic, which was kind of a little bit counterintuitive because, we were
not the time to be writing about massive community interaction.
It was, a period of mass isolation across the globe. But the pandemic, as horrific as it was, it really, really very clearly demonstrated to people that, we already knew that if you're lonely, if you're in isolation, then we already knew that was the equivalent of having really bad health, and it was as risky as smoking 20 cigarettes a day in terms of the effect it could have on your physical health. We also already knew that being lonely or being isolated can result in mental health issues. There's a higher incidence of anxiety and depression, for example. So we knew that being sociable acted as a bit of a buffer and gave a resilience against mental ill health. But what the pandemic very, very clearly also showed was that as different countries entered isolation at different times across the globe, you could start to see a fall in IQ for individual members of that country, which then, those that were taking part in the study, and which then reverted back to normal IQ levels after those isolation measures were removed. So we are seeing time and time again, but very clearly during the pandemic, that, this idea of a lone genius working completely in isolation and making all the breakthroughs by themselves is just a myth. And actually, we need each other's brains, we need each other's company in order to stay physically healthy, to stay mentally healthy, but also to make sure that our brain is flourishing and we can tap into that intelligence that we hold within our own individual mind. And neuroscience has been looking at exactly what happens when groups of brains or groups of people work together. So there's an EEG machine which can measure, I was talking about the electrical activity that goes across our brain, across our circuit board to create our sense of reality, to create our memories, to create our ideas and help us to innovate and problem solve. Well, those electrical oscillations that occur within an individual brain actually start to become synchronized. They start to become in step with other people's brain waves as we work together with them well, as we perform well with them, as we build consensus, and as we learn from other people. Our brains become literally physiologically attuned. And this is something that we're probably already intuitively aware of, because we hear, there's statements like saying, I feel like I'm in tune with you. I feel in step with you. And this is literally happening within the physiology of our mind. So knowing that, and interestingly, the degree of brain synchronicity can actually predict how well a group of people can work together and how well they can problem solve. So knowing that, is there anything that we can do to help ourselves to increase brain synchronicity between members of people when they're working together? And yes, there is. So
well, that's good news. That's good news. That's why we're here today. And I know that my job is to ask questions. but I'm really having to fight every element internally telling me that I just want to hang on to every word and listen to you talk all day. I'm completely enthralled and enthused, but I'm gonna stick loosely on topic and say I was going to see if there was a natural segue between 86 trillion connections in the brain into alumni communities, but none of our amazing customers or friends have a community of that size just yet. But what I do love, and what I do know from my own networks, is that community and not being isolated is crucial. And you say crucial for mental health, crucial for sustaining my IQ. So you also started to talk about groups, or you called it groups of brains, which I'm quite sure is not currently how anyone listening thinks about all of the people in their fabulous communities. But could we talk about groups have a higher chance of succeeding than individuals because of joined up thinking is your premise? Can you kind of give us a sense of that? And of course, a lot of people listening today, and I can see people on the line, are from corporates who recognise that they've got sort of internal people, an internal workforce, and alumni who some people would call an external workforce. Groups of people that hold power and ability and smarts. Can we start by digging in there?
Yeah, so it's going back to this 86 billion nerve cells, actually, and going back to this incredibly intricate and sophisticated and very individual circuit board that creates our very unique mind. So that number 86 billion is actually about 14 and a half times the number of people on the planet, just to give you some idea of the vastness, of the intricateness, of the complicated nature of our brains. But it's that vast number that allows us to be so individual and to have such a breadth of different behaviors that we can exhibit between each different individual on this planet, because we each have a very unique brain. Now, because of the way that circuit board is laid down, we each have our individual strengths, but we each also have our individual flaws or idiosyncrasies, because we each see the way in a slightly different way based on the genes and based on the experiences that we've had. But when you bring together a group of brains or a community, a group of people, what you can see is if you allow them to freely communicate and to work together, then they are more able to create a more accurate representation of the world and balance out any individual biases that each individual member might have. And so you're basically creating a fuller picture of the world, so you can see the world in its truer state. And so then you're much more able to problem solve and make decisions based on that more accurate representation. And also, because you're bringing together a number of people that have these different brain strengths, then you're basically increasing the breadth and the depth of cognitive power that's available within that group.
That is, I'm making notes, which I don't usually do in the middle of doing a webinar, Hannah. As I said, I'm going to try not to hang on your every word. That's so fascinating. And it's a way that we don't usually approach thinking about this, right? We think about how can we build a community as quickly as possible, or what can we give it? But actually, we're kind of going back to like the why. So I guess in that sense, how can we build communities at work that truly benefit the workplace? And I guess the question is, how do you build a community that really matters? How can you make sure these types of communities are optimized? And by optimized, it doesn't necessarily be commercial. It might just be optimize the people in there to contribute to the call to action.
Yeah, so then it's going back to this idea of brain synchronicity between the different members of the community, so that they can start to learn from each other and build consensus, so that they can innovate together and problem solve more effectively. You want to have that higher degree of brain synchronicity. And so there's some lovely tricks from neuroscience that we've seen helps to increase the chance that you do get that physiological attunement with other people. So for example, simple little things that we already know intuitively to be true. So if we look people in the eye directly, that increases the chance that you get that brain synchronicity. If you exercise with other people, again, that's a team building kind of performance. And you can see that it also increases brain synchronicity. Simple things like singing together has also been shown or is linked to that degree of brain synchronicity. So these are simple things that across different cultures, across the world, you see time and time again throughout our species history that people do look each other in the eye directly. They do sing together and they do exercise together. And it actually helps them to learn from each other and to build consensus and to operate as a tight-knit team. So anything that you can do to embed those types of activities within your community can help. And then I really wanted to go back to your point about alumni members and legacy and almost a sense of commitment or inclusion within the community. So there's a number of, again, robust scientific studies to show that the number one predicting factor for how well a group will succeed at being able to tap in to that cognitive capacity that's available to them so that they can problem solve effectively together. The number one predicting factor isn't actually the individual IQ members of the individual members, it's the gender ratio. So the higher the number of females within a group, the better able that group will be at being able to tap into, to harness that collective intelligence that's on offer to them.
The higher the number of females, or the more balance that there is?
No, so the higher the number of females. So it's not balance, it's actually, so diversity is a good thing for every single measure that's been analysed by scientists. So when we're looking at genetic diversity, when we're looking at cultural diversity, when we're looking at experience diversity, when we're looking at age diversity, we see time and time, expertise diversity, for example, we see time and time again that diversity is incredibly important so that you get that breadth of expertise, that breadth of different ways of thinking, so that you can then bring those people together. And as long as they can communicate freely and in a positive way together, then they're more able to create a larger breadth and depth of cognitive thinking. However, this isn't the case with gender. So the higher females within a group, and it goes past the 50-50 ratio, we're going actually all the way up to almost 100, you're seeing the higher the number of females within a group, generally speaking, the better they are at being able to tap into that cognitive resource that's on offer. And this is one of the most robust factors that helps to predict collective intelligence, also the so-called C factor within a group. Now, scientists are interested in exactly why that is. Is it that males are just not able to work as a group, something to do with their Y chromosome? Well, no, we don't think that that is the case. It's probably more that culturally, females are taught from a very young age to appreciate the art of turn-taking and listening. And these are the crucial skills that underpin our ability to form collective intelligence, to work as a group, and to problem solve into the future.
Well, 20% of the people attending are male and 80% are female. So I'm just going to quietly say under my breath, I'm going to have a really good look at maybe we should think about an all-female board. But our CRO is listening, so I don't want to get myself into trouble, Hannah. That's fascinating. Not necessarily want to dive into today, but that is really interesting to learn. So from what you're saying, and from an alumni community perspective, of course, part of an alumni community is the fact that you can be more inclusive because it's digital. What used to be the case is you would go out with a few people after work that you used to work with, and that would be people that still were in employment, but maybe a particular demographic, men that were still at work. And actually alumni communities, by enabling them to kind of exist in the digital world, means they can be so much more inclusive. You can go overseas, you can reach people who aren't at work, people who are not necessarily online can use their phone if they're not on a desktop. They're kind of much larger communities. So from what you said about looking in the eye and some of the things that really kind of allow that interaction, it sounds like on the one hand, it's really crucial where possible to try and have physical interaction if you're really trying to problem solve. You should, at work, people often have employee resource groups, sports or running club or whatever it might be. So those kind of things, like to sort of push that out into the alumni community, are really important and trying to have in person. How does that work digitally with a bundle of people in the room if they can see each other? Is it the same? Like I'm looking you in the eye right now, but you might not know.
Synchronizing.
There we are. That's it. I'm really doing my damn best, but you might not know that. My camera might be wonky. What happens in the digital world?
Yeah, so that's a really, really, really relevant point. Now, the original studies for this were done actually pre-pandemic by Victoria Leong. She's based at Cambridge University and has since moved to Singapore. She's a professor there, and she did the original studies actually in children, looking at a caregiver or a teacher directly that was in the room, and then comparing that to somebody, the caregiver or the teacher that was operating via a screen. And what she found was that the degree of brain synchronicity was very much hampered when it was via digital screen. So you had to have, in order to get the optimal level of brain synchronicity to help boost the learning and to build consensus and to help with the communication, you needed to be in person in the room with the individual. Now, this was pre-pandemic. And I think that, over the last couple of years, we have all had a lot of experience of working working over screens. And I think, and this goes back to what my PhD was in, which was basically looking at how those connections in our brain form, how that plasticity, how that flexibility exists within our brain, so that we can start to form new connections as we learn from our world and as we remember new things and as we start to navigate the world based on new knowledge that we've acquired from recent days. And I think, I mean, the research isn't completely in yet, but I think our brains have caught up a bit and we're able to get a small degree of brain synchronicity via digital interactions. But I think we're still missing a little bit of information from interaction.
Yeah, I mean, so essentially there's dexterity, which we know there are. We know what's optimal for people, and we know what's not quite as good. Sometimes not quite as good is good, or especially certainly when you're talking about doing or living through a pandemic, for example. Right, collective intelligence. What I don't want to do is get all the way through this and not talk about what collective intelligence actually is, and then I'd love to talk through how that actually relates to building engaged communities. What does collective problem solving mean? And I guess there's theory, which you're so good at explaining in a very, for me, certainly layman's terms, and in practice. And how does that inform how companies use mentoring or disseminate learning or advice or discuss industry specific issues? I'd love to dig into that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, I think, well, first of all, I'm going to go back to this brain with the 86 billion connections, the 86 billion nerve cells. So each one of us, at any second, we're being bombarded through our senses with something in the region of 11 billion bytes of data every single second. So there's huge amounts of data that's coming in through our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, our sense of balance, our sense of taste. All of this information is filtering into this circuit board to help create our sense of reality. But we're not consciously aware of the vast majority of that data. So it's something in the region of 30 to 40 bytes of data per second that we're actually consciously aware of. So it's a really minuscule proportion. So the rest of the data from the outside world, some of it is actually stored not within our brains and not within our own conscious awareness, but it's actually stored within our so-called embodied cognition. So there's a huge number of nerve cells which exist within our heart, within our gut, within our body. And it's called this ability to store intelligence from the outside world within this embodied cognition system. And I want to talk to you about a little study that's been done by John Coates. Now, this study has come from possibly an unlikely source, but he used to work on the trading floor back in Wall Street, back in the day when all the stocks and shares were being sold in person on the trading floor, and it was very bustling. There was huge amounts of data, huge amounts of information within that room, a huge amount of collective intelligence within the crowd of traders. They were all emitting different signals about their own decision making. They might be giving off sweats, kind of that signified that they were stressed, for example, because there was a particular chemical within that you might not be consciously aware of, but your brain is being primed for the sense of fear from your neighbour. So all of this information that we might not be consciously aware of. Now, John Coates was working on the trading floor back in the day, and he was incredibly successful. He made a huge bunch of money. And at one point, he kind of took a step back and he just, he kind of thought, what is it about me that is so successful? What is it about me that's made me so rich? And what he decided to do, he had a bit of a hunch of an idea, and he decided to take that hunch of an idea and retrain in neuroscience, which is where I met him at the Judge Business School at Cambridge University. And what he found in an admittedly small scale study is that, firstly, traders are much better at picking up on that embodied cognition when compared to controls, and that influenced their decision making. So he tested this via something called the heartbeat detection ability. So he was basically, there's a vagus nerve which runs all the way down from the brain, all the way down. It's a bundle of nerves that runs to our heart and to our gut, and it picks up those signals from the nerve cells that live there and sends a signal via the vagus nerve to the region of the brain called the insula, which is involved in kind of detecting environmental signals and can affect our decision making. And what he found was that traders basically had a more sensitive vagal nerve activity, and they were better able to listen to their own heartbeat and accurately detect their heartbeat. And even more impressive was that heartbeat detection ability, that vagal nerve sensitivity, predicted how much profit those traders made during a period of economic downturn. And it's because they were able to tap into that.
They could smell a problem.
They could smell, they had that intuitive, introspective ability. They were able to harness the collective intelligence that was around them, all of those signals that many people might not be consciously aware of. And it was literally allowing them to prime their brain so that they could make snap decisions that actually affected how much money they made, their profits, in a significant way. Now, knowing that, is there anything that we can all do to help us to tap into that collective intelligence around us so that we're more consciously aware of it? Well, there's a lovely researcher called Sarah Garfinkel. She's a professor at University College London. And what she's been looking at doing is, again, these are pilot studies and they're quite small scale studies. And this is a new area of neuroscience. But she's been just getting people to spend a bit of time doing heart star jumps and running on the spot to get their heart pumping, to get it beating a little bit faster. And then after that, after just 30 seconds, a minute of doing that, just sitting quietly and spending time tapping in to that heartbeat, and really listening to the signals from the body. And she's found just doing that for a few weeks can help to increase your vagal nerve activity and help you to maybe access that embodied cognition, that collective intelligence a little bit more effectively, so that you can start making decisions with more information at hand. So it seems quite sensible, doesn't it?
It seems utterly sensible. As I say, I'm voraciously making notes in order to make myself more efficient and have better sixth sense and storing insights in my gut. So how can that inform, for all of the people listening, how they use the mentoring, the disseminating the advice, the industry topics? How does that inform how you should be informing other people in many ways?
So I think it's going back to this idea that it's relinquishing ego. So it's accepting that you have a very individual brain with strengths, but also flaws, because every single brain on this planet makes assumptions and comes to erroneous kind of versions of reality based on our past experiences and our genetics. So each of us sees the world in a slightly inaccurate way, and we interact with the world in an inaccurate way. But if you want to be a good leader, if you want to be a good member of a community, then really you want to make sure that the community feels confident communicating effectively. So people feel comfortable kind of offering up their viewpoint, that they are going to be listened to, that they're going to be heard, that their views aren't going to be quashed, that there's not going to be an echo-like chamber of clone-like ideas where any other viewpoints might just be kind of flicked aside. So it's creating a culture of curiosity and tolerance for different views, and also, welcoming in different views so that you can help with the innovation and the problem solving and looking at things from new ways. So there's simple ways that people can do that in groups. So for example, there's been, again, studies that have shown that if you flip hierarchies, so the most junior person of a team actually leads the group, then you create more ideas. People feel more comfortable voicing their ideas. If you do brain writing, rather than verbally brainstorming, then people will anonymously write down twice as many ideas, and those ideas are thought to be their value when independently assessed is thought to be as high as well. So there's little tactics like that I discuss in the book. And then in terms of alumni specifically, what I was thinking,
I was thinking one of the things from what you're telling me is, because a lot of people listening are responsible for the framework, the infrastructure and the delivery and the content for these very, very large corporate communities. I think one of the things that I'm getting from what you've just been saying is, don't assume that you know what people want. I don't know whether that is but that because one of the things we're talking to people about, how to build or how to do or what to do, there are some things where you come, as you say, with your own bias. So essentially what I'm hearing, for example, is you should be surveying people, you should be flipping round how you do things. You should be asking people sometimes versus telling them and assuming. That maybe the voices or the information or the insights you're sharing, of course, if you are a managing partner of a law firm, people want to hear what you have to say with your expertise on a particular topic, or if you're a, certainly people want to hear from thought leaders and people who are very readily identifiable. We do something, and lots of our customers do something called Alumni Stories, where they share stories of people who've left, gone and done wonderful things. And those wonderful things could be something fantastic at work, but it could be a really small project you did that was wonderful, denting your local community, or climbing Kilimanjaro for charity, or whatever else it might be. So it sounds like actually the kind of a lot of desire to contribute and strength comes from not assuming and amplifying, lifting up, putting in front of people that maybe they can more readily identify with. Does that seem to make sense?
Yeah, and also, all of our brains. So we're as a species, we are primed. There's a social brain circuit. There's a circuit embedded deep within our brain, making us want to be part of a community. That's the majority of people, and it varies from individual to individual, but it's embedded deep within our neural circuitry, and it's been key to our evolution and success of a species, that we do want to be part of a tribe. We want to be part of a community. It makes us feel safe. It helps us to kind of take risky decisions sometimes and think in new ways. So it's very much it's very good for our species, kind of prosperity and ability to thrive into the future. But on an individual level, it's actually very good for our individual brains as well.
Being part of a tribe it gives you that sort of sense of belonging and feeling. Do you think that applies to corporate communities as well? Is it any tribe, or is it just what kind of tribes? Bearing in mind our audience, of course, are interested in like what people identify with in order to make that sense of connection. And we were talking about this recently, of course.
Yeah. So if the tribe, so I'm going to go back to neural circuitry here. So if the tribe instills a feeling of fear, of threat, and it becomes a little bit too insular and focused on kind of attack from other groups and trying to defend itself, then what happens there within the individual brains is that there's a hyperactivity of the region of the brain called the amygdala, which is the brain region that's involved in the threat response. So that's
not too much corporate news is basically what you're saying. In an alumni community. The kind of translation for that in an alumni community is not too much corporate news, or not too much that's only about you. I mean, essentially, when you're communing with people to make them feel part of a tribe, actually just like don't push too much about your corporate self. Companies shouldn't do that. Is that?
No, so it's more, don't try and create a tribe based on fear. So bringing a group together by exaggerating and amplifying the worst case scenario or the fear of a competitor, actually that creates a hyperactivity of the amygdala within the members' brains at the expense, or it probably would, at the expense of another region called the anterior cingulate cortex, which is the brain region that's involved in horizon scanning, it's involved in forming novel partnerships, it's involved in innovation. So these are key brain region that you require that electrical activity so that our species can problem solve into the future and horizon scan. So basically you want a group, a community of people that feel safe. They feel that they can bring up kind of their own cognitive offerings, their own ideas in a safe space. They're not feeling that they're being threatened by another tribe on the outside. There's not a contagious concept of fear within that community. And actually it's more a community that cultivates curiosity, that cultivates free discussion, no fear of being judged. And that's what helps with the anterior cingulate cortex lighting up with activity so that people can form partnerships within that community to help solidify the bonds so that you create a strong community, but it also creates a wonderful safe space so that you can create innovation and allow new ideas to hop from mind to mind and evolve within that group. And that is what makes a group of people exciting. They get, they feel comfortable with each other. They're forming new partnerships. They're getting new ideas. Their brain is fizzing with potential, huge amounts of synaptic plasticity. And that's when people feel, generally, we're primed to enjoy that feeling rather than creating a community that has been driven by fear.
Thank you. We've got, by the way, people should feel free to put questions into the system, and they're starting to come up. So I will ask them, Hannah, bit by bit as they come through. I think a natural segue to one we've just received is, what is the importance of company culture and belonging based on what you're saying? The person's asking, we communicate with people who have left. so they're less interested in company news? Can we make them feel part of a community really and truly, with your thinking?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to this idea of cathedral thinking and legacy. And I think, do you know what? I think this is kind of the thing that, you know, as we understand more about neuroscience, how our own neural networks operate, it's inspired the generation of artificial intelligence system, right, and brain-machine interfaces that has created unprecedented levels of change and is creating explosions in new ways of thinking, which is, you know, an AI is, we're just grappling with how it's going to be affecting communities and our species into the future. But I think one thing that sets us as humans apart from these artificial intelligence systems is this idea that we can operate on longer timescales. We have the ability within our human brain to form bonds and to imagine the future for our descendants. And we have that sense of loyalty as well, that's and moral responsibility that's embedded again within discrete circuits within the human brain. And so I think alumni really is tapping in to that concept of legacy and of an appreciation for longer timescales within our brain. And again, it's looking at that activation of the anterior cingulate cortex, which is involved in horizon scanning, forming novel partnerships at the expense of the amygdala, the fear response, but also at the expense of the nucleus accumbens, which is involved in kind of immediate pleasure and reward, and immediate gratification of yourself in the here and now.
I don't know how our team write up what we learned from this. And I'm just thinking of the poor but inspired team listening to this, who are having the most exceptional lesson in biology. So I cannot wait to see, by the way, afterwards what they write up about this. Hannah, can I just ask you, sort of based on that, bearing in mind an alumni community is a group of people who've left that are maintain a connection. There's certainly a big digital community. Sometimes there are things that happen in person, sometimes there aren't. But I guess, you know, if you're thinking about different tribes that contribute to collective thinking and effectively to success, are there ways in which you think an alumni community can contribute to the wider company community? So, for example, alumni are people who've left, they used to work there, they're further, they're far remote, they're not people you sit next to, you may not even know them. And then, of course, employees themselves are also widely dispersed. How does that work with kind of like communities that are on the outside? How can a corporate alumni community contribute to a big corporate from your framework?
Well, so the alumni have obviously had a similar experience of working within that organization, and they've got a loyalty to it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be kind of interacting as an alumni member. So they've got a loyalty to that particular brand, to that identity, and it's helped to shape them. But they've then since gone and experienced different aspects of the world, which they've developed cognitive strengths and a cognitive breadth as a result of those experiences that they've had since. And so it's literally the ability of theirs to share the experiences that they've had since, and they've got that sense of that legacy, that cathedral thinking that might be built in, and that sense of kind of they feel bonded with that group, which is the alumni community. But then I think we also need to, when you're building an alumni community, you also need to, you know, think strategically about what you can offer the alumni community, because you're getting something in return. You're getting their perspective, their growth, the way that they have experienced different things as they've developed in particular areas, and hopefully you can start to tap into some of that collective intelligence within those individual members. But what can you offer the alumni? And then you probably want to start tapping into that nucleus accumbens, that region of the brain that's involved in reward and motivation. And also that thing that I was talking about earlier about what sets us apart as humans is that longer term view, that cathedral thinking, that legacy view, that requirement of ours, that need of ours to feel that we have a purpose and that we are involved in some kind of legacy.
Yeah, so I mean,
to make our alumni members feel reward and pleasure from the interaction, but also to encourage that feeling of legacy and perpetuity. So it's not just you in the here and now. You're part of a wider thing, a bigger thing. And people like that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. So we know companies need to call on alumni because they can learn from them, and you're sharing how and why. And I guess as alumni leaders, we need to think about what you said: reward and motivation. Then you said reward and pleasure. And I have to say, I know a lot of people that are on the line, and no doubt lots of people that will be listening in that will be chuckling to themselves about reward and pleasure. But ultimately, that's very true, right? And providing that at scale is very challenging for a lot of the people listening. If you've got a community of 5,000, 50,000, that's a lot of people to cater to. And of course, you can't do that individually with everybody. You can't even necessarily do that with so many groups. That's a lot of people to service. But is there does the brain appreciate trying to stay in touch and trying to maintain a connection? Not something I've ever asked you before. We've sort of, because what you said to us is we've got very flexible brains. And of course, alumni is something where you have to have motivation and reward and stay part of this tribe, and we want to help you, and we want to build a lifelong relationship, which is a really important message. Does that motivation come out when you're launching an alumni network and saying, I really want to stay in touch with you? You've been with us for so long, we don't want the connection to fall off a cliff. Or does the brain not do that?
Well, I mean, it's like little things like, creating family events for alumni members that have just had families, and so that they can go back to the family alumni event and interact with employees that are working there, and they feel that sense of belonging, that they are still part of that community. I think Magdalen College, where I'm based, is very good at offering that. So offering little things like that, or alumni dinners, or offering calendars or books to alumni members, or chocolates, or some of their wine from the cellar at different prices, at members' prices, all of those types of things. So a wide range of different offerings that can light up different individual reward circuits in the brain, so that people want to stay part of that community. I think, that's generally quite a sensible approach.
I don't think I'm writing down, so as I said, some things. Light up individual reward circuits is really something that I'm pretty confident no one has ever written down, but it's an absolutely brilliant way to think about it, right? There are different things that light people up. We've got people on the line. I know many of them who do very small, very cohesive group of events by city, so that people get to know each other based on geography. We've got a healthcare alumni community on the line, a very large hospital group in the US that I know keep in touch with people that have lost a partner. So they have a sort of group for widows and widowers. So essentially what you're saying is, where possible, because of course at scale it's challenging to do things for everyone, have a sort of personal touch that reaches people's kind of most human needs in many ways. So I don't think anyone's ever had a family event, but I might be wrong. Feel free to put a note in the chat if I've got that wrong.
It's almost like offering, because each individual brain is different. So it's almost like offering, a plate of tapas, so that people can pick which bit that they want, and then they get satisfaction from the particular bits of the tapas that they want, rather than everybody having roast dinner and expecting everybody to enjoy that.
Well, that's a little bit about, so for example, there are lots of ways to stay in touch with people, but if it's utterly generic, then we always say that's the same thing that we always say, which is, if you're just shouting with a megaphone to absolutely everybody, you don't engage anybody. But if you can start to slice and dice a little bit, even if it's just by relevance of geography, or just, then that sort of personalization and nuance does also helps you, because it helps people to stay a little bit more connected and a little bit more interested with what you're talking about. I mean, in your research, a question I've got here, did you come across challenges in implementing or encouraging joined up thinking? And if so, what are some of the solutions or strategies to overcome them? Hard question to make you think there.
No, it's really hard. I think
joined up thinking for me, Hannah, is the dexterity, right? So you can always, it sounds to me like it's just how can you do it better? So we all joined up thinking some way, because we go to the supermarket and we make a purchase, we go online, we make a phone call. So we're all always connecting. Is it just, so for you, is it more, because I can see your hesitation with the question, is it more you think about how you can optimize it and do it better because everybody joined up thinks? So when you're building out a community, an alumni community, a big network of people, what you should be focusing on is how you can do it better?
Yeah, so I think let's break this down into two different components. How can you do joined up thinking within your own mind a little bit better, right? And what are the challenges there? So we know that one of the fastest speed of electrical oscillations across the brain is called gamma waves. And we really need those fast speed of electrical oscillations so that we can access all the disparate regions within our brain, so that we can think with our whole brain, so that we can start to make decisions not just on impulse, but by accessing all that framework of wisdom and information that's stored in all the different areas of the brain. And we know that meditation, for example, is actually associated with increasing the frequency of gamma wave activity. So it ramps up gamma wave activity, which is possibly counterintuitive. So you might think that sitting still and reflecting and meditating and that having that quiet period would actually quieten down and slow the electrical oscillations in the brain, but it actually does the opposite, and that allows you to have joined up thinking within your own brain. But then how do we make sure that we have joined up thinking with other people's brains? So it's going back to making sure that you operate as part of a team where there's a diverse number of different people within that team in terms of genetic diversity, experience diversity, age diversity, because we know that
your community, your alumni network needs to include, I guess what I'm taking here is, even if the people you're targeting are women in their 40s with a certain demographic, if you're building out an alumni network, it's absolutely crucial for the company itself to get the best out of its community, to have a broad range of people in there. So even if you think you don't want to rehire that demographic, even if you think you don't want to have, there's no business development with this particular demographic, in actual fact, if you're asking the community, if you're asking your alumni network to support you, contribute, get involved in mentoring, get involved in initiatives, answer surveys, actually the premise of what you're saying for an alumni network is you must always have different groups of people, because you don't actually know for sure who's going to be the one that is the most helpful, which demographic is the most useful. Of course, we know if you want to hire, then you need to focus on people of working age. They need to be in your community, but just don't have those people in isolation. Make sure there are others in the group to kind of contribute to that.
Exactly. Yeah. So that you've got that breadth of thinking that's available to you, so that you can start to tap into it, and that people feel comfortable communicating. They feel, again, going back to this idea that they feel comfortable and confident offering up their ideas. They know what their particular expertise or niche is, and they are confident within that, so that you can start to create a greater pool of collective intelligence that you can tap into. And then I kind of want to go back to, you were talking about whether, I think you mentioned whether some people want to interact and engage more with alumni networks more than others. So when we look at introverts, say, compared to extroverts, we see that there's some really interesting biological findings. So introverts have a smaller volume of a region of the brain that's got these beta endorphin receptors spread across it. And so they literally don't have such an urge to go out and kind of interact with as many people in order to fill up those beta endorphin receptors. So they're kind of like the good chemical, good hormone within the brain that makes us feel nice and buzzy and warm. So they have fewer of those slots to fill up, and they don't feel quite as driven as extroverts who have a larger region of the brain and more beta endorphin slots that literally are driven to go and interact with as many people as possible in order to feel like that brain region is full. It's got that nice chemical that's released there. Now, introverts are very important because they allow a small community of support and a close network to be formed that can help support each other. Extroverts are very important because although they might spend less time nurturing each individual relationship, they're helping to allow ideas to hop from group to group. So they're facilitating the spread of innovation and new ideas. So both types of people with their different types of biology are very important for the smooth running of a group and also of a society. So again, it's appreciating all of this different ways of that people think because of their biology, and catering for each type of person within.
Yeah, and I mean, we normally do webinars about how to build a community, and we have customers on that talk about theirs, give sort of use cases and all those sorts of things. So some of the questions I'm getting are really, really interesting. I've got one here that is specifically about what you just said. Hannah, I know you don't run alumni communities, and you're here to tell us how to think better about tapping into brains so people positively contribute to our communities. Are you saying that we should target introverts so the good hormone slots are full and they'll be very loyal and the best contributors? Great question.
That is a really great question. Yes. I suppose, yeah. I'm saying that actually, you really need to get on board the introverts as well as the extroverts. So it's not just about organizing, large events that attracts the extroverts. Actually, you need to be thinking about the introverts as well.
So in many ways, what I hear from that is that digital communities are a digital community is very easy to access if you don't really feel like going to an event, if you don't really feel like being in a large crowd. So actually, in many ways, I'm just thinking that through. And so the next step from that is a digital community is a really great way to get people who you might not ordinarily get into your community to come and join you, who then will be contributors, because slowly but surely they'll start to feel part of the tribe and want to contribute more. So from the perspective of the person asking that question, which is a fantastic question, effectively, where I'm getting towards the end of this webinar is, in actual fact, a digital community is a great way to access people who might ordinarily not be activated in some of the more conventional methods to be part of a bigger community. Does that sort of make sense?
Yes. Yeah. That sounds very sensible to me. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. So for example, people are often thinking about, who their communities are, how digital communities work, and what the pros and cons are of, because of course, some people have budget for events, some people have the digital location for an event. Lots of people can't do that because they're companies that spread super far and wide, and alumni are everywhere. So that's a really interesting nuance. Thank you for everyone's questions. We've got time for sort of one or two more. I'll take just one to kind of to head this off, Hannah. Thinking from the perspective of people listening, so in large corporates who look after large communities, which are not chat groups, right? They're just that there are different reasons for different people to speak to each other, but it's an outbound conversation you're having, inviting people to join in and get involved in certain events, activities, learning, whatever else it might be, join groups. What are the stepping stones, I guess, to make people more engaged in your community? And you've mentioned, obviously, in person ideally helps, but you've also talked about how introverts, frankly, are really, really important to a community, and they may be the people that don't want to necessarily come in person first. Is there something, when you are communicating with people, when you're writing emails, when you're writing content, is there anything from a kind of written narrative perspective that you can do to help activate people on the other side of your communications?
I think not to come across as a bit grumpy is the first one. To come across as positive.
I don't think any of our customers write grumpy newsletters, but that's an excellent one to keep in mind.
There's so much negativity within the world that actually it's quite nice and it's quite refreshing to put a positive slant on it. And again, it's making sure that the person that's reading it, the person that's receiving this news, can see what's in it for them. What reward are they going to get? So, okay, they might feel a sense of legacy, they might feel a sense of responsibility, but also you want to make sure that they feel that they're going to be getting something positive from this interaction as well, from this relationship. And they want to invest their time and their energy and their mental resource in also facilitating this relationship. So it's not entirely one-sided. So you're giving something to them. And that might be positivity, that might be some event that's being offered, or it might be some kind of new interaction or new offer that's available for them. I think, and
presumably contributing to people's professional journey, which is a really large part of corporate alumni communities, whether it is from updating people about sector relevant news or whatever else it might be. If you're contributing to people's professional journey, presumably that kind of lights up the joined up thinking and lights up all of the warm fuzzy receptors and makes people feel even more connected if you're helping.
Yeah. And all of us are wired to enjoy novelty. So we don't, part of the reason that the alumni might be wanting to have this relationship with these corporations is that they might be existing within their own particular bubble, within their own silo of their new organization that they're working in, but they'll still be seeking some novelty within their working life. And so perhaps they could get that from the alumni relationship, this new way of thinking that can spark this novelty receptor within their brain so that they get a fizz of dopamine that way as well.
Yeah, well, effectively, alumni networks are many things. They are corporate communities. They're a way to learn. They're a way to upskill. They're a way to engage. they're a way to consume, they're a way that, you know, that there's any number of things that they're there for. And of course, you know, the communities are powered by corporates who support them, look for ways to help them. And it sounds like, you know, the novelty point is really how the perks, rewards, you know, we've got retailers that do really fabulous things at different times of the year. It's Christmas time, so lots of our retailers are giving their alumni really fun perks and you know, to remember the place they worked in a really fantastic format. You know, Easter, there are fabulous Easter eggs and spring seed collections for people's gardens, all kinds of great ideas. So it sounds like also the novelty of that is actually just the enjoyment of seeing something new and different being done. It's not necessarily, it's not the sort of quantum of what you're offering. It's just like, how does it make you feel? Does that sound fair?
Yes, I think that sounds, yeah. And going back to these family days as well, you know, it really generated a feeling of pride. I think that's it, a feeling of pride and of progress, and this idea that you are part of something that is bigger, something that has wider ramifications. It's not just about you in the here and now or the last decade. It's a much longer timescale thing, and that's what makes us feel that we are human, because we have a relationship with our past, but also with our future.
Yeah. That is, well, Hannah, that's a brilliant way to end, right? Pride in being part of something bigger, which is essentially what an alumni community is. You know, I'm part of a few from places I used to work, and I met friends, best friends, you know, people that were investors in my business in the very early days, people that helped me, people that mentored me, people I've given help back. So that really rounds things up. This is a really unusual one for us, Hannah, but I was so grateful to you for joining us, because essentially I think we need to remember when we're communicating with people is A, what lights them up, and B, also how all of these wonderful people can come together and contribute to our businesses to help them problem solve, help us find more resources, help us solve a problem, help us hire better people, help us with our diversity goals, support our campaigns, and just generally make it a symbiotic relationship. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm going to have to get a signed copy of your book now that we've actually sat down and done this. So it's sitting on my desk, so I'll stick it in the mail and I'll have to get that from you. Thank you very much, Hannah.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you.